All right, we'll give it another minute or so for more people to trickle in, and then we'll get started. All right, it's 7:01, so we'll get started tonight. My name's Austin Gastro. I'm with the Department of Planning and Development, and I'm joined by my co-presenter, Mike Davis from Land Development Services. We are here this evening to provide a status update of the Parking Reimagined project, including a summary of significant proposed administrative changes and new draft bicycle parking requirements. In June, we updated the board on our progress with the project, which coincides with the release of our tiered framework for public comment. Since then, we have released draft minimum parking requirements for all uses in the zoning ordinance, while continuing a public outreach period, which has included 9 community open houses, as well as outreach to board advisory committees, community-specific associations, and boards and industry groups. As a reminder, minimum parking rates dictate the minimum amount of parking required for a development or use. With the exception of the existing planned Tyson's Corner district, this project does not propose caps on parking, known as parking maximums. As of November of 2022, we released draft ordinance text, which includes minimum parking rates, administrative provisions, off-street loading requirements, and minimum bicycle parking requirements for public review and comment. An in-depth review of this proposal can be found in the white paper posted on the Parking Reimagined webpage. As a reminder, our project goals include developing parking regulations that align with the diverse context of land use within Fairfax County, such as the tiered framework. Also, we have sought ways to create more regulatory flexibility in designing and providing parking, while establishing simplified and predictable parking review processes. When we initiated this process in October of 2021, we identified some core community values that we intend to address, such as equity, affordability, environmental impact, land use site design, and economic impact. Our current white paper outlines these values and explores examples of how this project addresses them. All of these values and the proposed changes to Article 6 of the zoning ordinance positively support the goals of One Fairfax and the strategic plan. I'll now hand it over to Mike Davis, my co-presenter, who will summarize proposed changes to the administrative provisions of the ordinance, as well as certain changes to minimum parking requirements. Mike?
Very much, Austin. Subsections 6100.1 through 6100.3 of the zoning ordinance discuss the general applicability of parking requirements, design of parking lots and spaces, and applicable standards to the calculation of required parking. The proposed changes outlined on the screen are intended to provide greater ease and flexibility in determining parking needs for sites and uses, which can be a complicated process achieving little actual benefit. It should also reduce artificial requirements for more parking. Further, these changes will enhance opportunities for parking adjustments to accommodate electric vehicle chargers and parking lot landscaping, with the goal of creating opportunities for environmental enhancements, particularly for existing parking lots that lack tree cover. Also, as depicted here, we're considering a concept to enhance requirements for safer pedestrian circulation within parking lots. While Americans for Disability Act requirements will continue to be in effect, we're looking at dedicated pedestrian pathway standards for the ordinance. These connections would be from existing off-site sidewalks to the primary building entrance. This subsection of Article 6 includes the base minimum parking rates for all uses identified in the zoning ordinance. These rates have been available for public review since July of 2022. In addition to the rates, many of which have been right-sized or simplified, this update includes modifications to proposed townhouse and stacked townhouse rates, to fine-tune the visitor overflow parking minimums to balance parking and open space, proposed lowering of minimum parking for offices greater than 50,000 square feet. This incorporates additional data and analysis received during the project, reducing the outdoor restaurant seating minimum requirement from 8 to 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet, with the possibility of no minimum requirement for this seating, and eliminating the director determination requirement for parking for all public park areas. Park operators have internal design and parking supply requirements for facilities within these parks. Further proposed changes include updated rates for shopping centers. We've also created more flexibility in the types of uses that can be within a shopping center without requiring more parking. We've also applied the shopping center concept to office uses, allowing a greater number of uses within these buildings without requiring more parking. The section also includes vehicle stacking requirements, which have been updated following staff analysis. This includes a reduction in required stacking spaces for drive-through uses. This shows the tiered framework we've been discussing with the community since June of 2022. At least 90% of the county's land area would remain subject to baseline requirements with modifications. Minimum parking requirements below the baseline rates are focused on areas defined in the comprehensive plan as growth areas. With the intent of right-sizing parking, the framework is particularly important where the densities and intensities of development and the availability of non-auto options allow for greater innovation in approaches to lowering parking supply. The range of required parking between the baseline and the existing planned Tyson's Corner requirements is between 60 and 90% of the baseline rates. Subsection defines the tiered parking framework. It also defines how residential development is proposed to be treated within the tiers. Single-family attached, stacked townhomes, and multifamily developments have proposed rates that are not specifically aligned with the percentage reductions in the tiers. Single-family attached and stacked townhomes have lower minimum rates that continue to recognize that a separate visitor overflow parking supply is needed, even when the unit parking rate is adjusted downward within the tiered framework. In lowering requirements for these unit types, we want to acknowledge that in higher density and intensity development areas of the county, less parking demand is expected with opportunities for multimodal transport and a variety of amenities in closer proximity to the community. We're also proposing a modification to the multifamily minimum requirements in the tiered framework. Historically, parking requirements for these residential developments are based on spaces per number of units. However, we've recognized that the number of bedrooms within these types of developments provides a more accurate assessment of parking demand. Thus, we're proposing to use a bedroom measure within higher density areas. And here's a reminder of the applicability of the tiered framework to an identified use, in this case, retail, showing a lower baseline rate in percentage increments. This subsection contains options to adjust or reduce the parking supply for a development site. Today, parking adjustments are divided in the ordinance between those which can be approved by the Board of Supervisors and those which can be approved by the Director of Land Development Services. It's proposed that adjustments up to 60% less than the required parking can be approved by the Director after review by technical staff. Currently, this is capped at 30% for some adjustments. It is anticipated that the board can approve reductions associated with land use actions after technical input is provided by staff. The board can approve adjustments that the director is unable to approve. The proposed changes to allowable adjustments include new options for shared parking reductions and transit-related adjustments, an affordable housing adjustment, an adjustment based on the proximity of public parking, such as metered parking or garages allowing public parking, and a consideration of adjustment opportunities for sites that have a historic designation and are tree coverage worthy of preservation that may conflict with minimum parking requirements. And with that, I will turn it back over to Austin to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Mike. Subsection 6101 defines minimum vehicle loading requirements. These requirements are proposed to be condensed and right-sized to address current loading practices and in response to analysis of frequently waived provisions. Establishing minimum bicycle parking requirements in the ordinance was envisioned from the onset of this project. Providing these requirements is important to support bicycle uses, which offsets auto parking demand. Staff has worked with the Fairfax County Department of Transportation, as well as the County Attorney's Office, to propose bicycle parking requirements as a new section of the zoning ordinance. The bicycle parking section includes minimum required bicycle parking rates, general provisions to define when bicycle parking is required, as well as the location and design requirements for bicycle parking spaces. Bicycle parking minimum requirements will be treated similar to vehicle parking by establishing a table of minimum requirements organized by land use classification. Bicycle parking rates for land uses and use classifications are proposed to be based on either a percentage of provided or required vehicle parking or a set number of spaces. These requirements would align with our proposed tiered framework by setting increased bicycle parking requirements in areas with denser development or in closer proximity to public transit. And on the screen now is an example of our interactive parking reimagined map. This is a map that is intended to give someone the ability to interactively search for an address or either click around on a map to determine what the parking requirement is for an area. In this case, I use Mosaic District because it's a really striated district for tiers. And as you can see, if you search by address, it shows you the area. It shows it in green being revitalization area. And as you click around the screen, there's these different parking areas. And so the idea there is that it gives you the ability to determine what the parking requirement is for that area. And when this goes live to the community, this would also be linked to the zoning ordinance so that if a suburban center parking rate was the parking rate for an area, there would also be a link to the suburban center parking requirements. So you'd be better informed of what the parking requirement is for the area you're interested in. And as
Sorry,
stated, it's not
Austin,
just by
can you
address.
back up to that first slide that you showed as part of your first presentation? This is going very fast. Sorry, it's Lynn Wellston here. If you could just back up like 3 slides.
We're actually going to keep going here. So 1 second, and please keep your comments to the end. We just want to get through this. Understand it's going quick, but we are recording this. So like all of our previous open houses and events, a recording of this will be on the webpage as well. So in this case, the suburban center parking rate was the requirement which we chose, and you could zoom to that or go to the different rates. So moving on. Since kickoff of this project in October of 2021, we've conducted nearly 100 project meetings, which include supervisor-sponsored town halls, individual project meetings with all board members, as well as meetings with board advisory committees, community service groups, community associations, industry groups, and internal county agencies. Since January of 2022, we've met monthly with our community project work group to discuss elements for our proposal and gain their perspectives. These discussions have been important in modifying our proposals and framing our public discussion of them. After our current public outreach period, staff will make modifications as needed to create a final draft with the intent to repeal and replace the provisions currently located in Article 6 of the zoning ordinance. The updated project timeline before you shows our goal of bringing a complete proposal back to the Planning Commission and Board by spring of 2023. I'd also like to say that on our project webpage, which Bill Malin shared a link to in the chat, we have a public input forum, which is a forum that works by just putting in comments. You can give us comments of what's proposed. And in that, you'll be able to comment on the ordinance that's currently out. And that closes February 2nd. And by closes, I mean that portal itself closes. However, at no point in time are we not taking comments on this proposal. So you can either email us on the email that's listed on the webpage. You can always share your comments to your board advisor or your board office or at public hearings. So lastly, as stated, we have a project webpage that is regularly updated with information and opportunities for the public to participate in the Parking Reimagined project. I want to thank you for your time tonight. We'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. And I would like to say that we have a lot of attendance tonight. We have 39 attendants in the community. So if possible, please keep your questions to 2 questions to start, and then we can double back to answer any other questions you may have. But we want to address that there are a lot of new faces in the room tonight and want to hear everyone's opinions if they have them or comments that they'd like to share. All right, anyone that's interested, you can either raise your hand or put a comment in the chat. Donna, you look like you have your hand raised. Go ahead. Donna, you're on mute.
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem.
I have 2 quick questions. In the presentation, you had talked about right-sizing parking. When I think about right-sizing, I think some areas would be decreased, some areas would be increased. Are there any areas throughout Fairfax County where there is going to be an increase in the minimum required parking?
So there are certain uses that we're looking at by use where there is an increase in parking. So yes, it's not across the board decreases. It's determining the parking rate and the minimum parking requirement for different uses. So there are a few uses that do increase.
What uses are they?
Mike, would you like to opine?
Sure. One of the uses that is actually having an increased requirement is the townhouse parking rate. Currently, that rate is 2.7 spaces per unit, but the proposal that we have on the baseline rates is an additional nuance for visitor parking. So in reality, provision of additional visitor parking will increase the parking supply at those types of developments within the baseline.
Let me ask a question real fast, Mike, because I might have some wrong information, but I thought the the townhouses were 2.0 with a 0.7 for visitor spots.
The current proposal is 2.5 with a 0.2 for visitor parking in the baseline rates.
Okay, but
But to continue,
that's not an increase because I thought it was 2.7 previously.
well, the increase comes because the current townhouse rate requires 2.7 spaces per unit. So frequently, the property developer will provide those spaces at the unit itself. And so what we were trying to do to address community concerns is about the lack of visitor parking or overflow parking within townhouse communities. We proposed this rate that would actually divide out visitor parking. So today there's no requirement to provide a set percentage of visitor parking at a townhome community. So this proposal that we have establishes that. So there will be additional dedicated parking for visitor and overflow within townhome communities. But to continue,
But the total rate of the townhouse is not increasing. You're just moving it from the townhouse resident to the visitor, correct?
Visitor shared.
conceivably, it will increase the amount of parking on the site based on how that parking is designated. But let me continue with some other changes that resulted in an increased rate. For religious assembly within a residential community, we've increased that rate from 1 space per 4 seats to 1 space per 3 seats. So that is an increase for religious assemblies within residential communities. The other changes that we have made with regard to changing the unit of measure associated with development could also increase rates, parking rates, depending on the size of the property. So, today it may be a lower rate for a particular use based on employees or some other measure, but when we move to a square foot measure, that could increase the requirement. Daycare centers is one example where today the unit of measure is number of students, and we've moved to a square footage measure. And so in that situation, if you have a larger daycare center, the parking rate actually increases over today's requirement. So those are a few examples of situations where we're proposing rate increases, or that the result of the application of the formula would require a higher parking requirement than today's requirement.
And also independent living facilities.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question was, has the county staff gotten any input from the Fairfax County Police Department concerning areas in which parking, as they already have too many vehicles, or where parking on the street could be dangerous, and where it would be good, where it may not be good to decrease parking, in other areas where it may be good to? Because I would think the police have a very good understanding of their communities.
We've met with different fire and rescue type groups, and we've also, in our work group, internal work group that meets weekly, we meet with representatives from the Fairfax County Department of Transportation, and they've had the ability to opine on any of the proposals that we have. And being the Fairfax County Department of Transportation deals with the transportation within the county, they are the subject matter experts regarding certain areas. So they've had that ability. But yes, we have met with different fire and rescue groups. I don't specifically remember if we met with the police early on, but we have met with those different types of groups.
Well, and just to add to Austin's statement, the Fairfax County Department of Transportation is the agency that administers on-street parking in the county. And so if there's a parking restriction or an issue with parking on the streets, they are the point agency for that circumstance to address the problem, either with additional signage, permit parking district, or other evaluations to determine whether the parking needs to be managed in some form or fashion. And we, as Austin indicated, the Department of Transportation is a member of our team and they do provide input as far as what effect our proposals may have on the street network. We meet weekly as a team internally, and they are part of that team meeting and have seen all of the proposals that we have put together in association with this project.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks for your questions there, Donna. Next up will be Fran.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I was wondering how your numbers, the numbers that you're proposing, compare with what's in the ITE manual, the Institute Transportation Engineers Manual. Have you looked at that and see if there's a relationship and what that is, and have you published it?
We have used the information in Parking Generation, which is an ITE publication, and that information informed our baseline rates that we're proposing. It also informs how we look at developments like multifamily developments, where that publication actually stratifies multifamily by either general urban suburban or proximity to rail or affordability factors. And so information that is in there helped guide us in the direction of making our recommendations associated with both the baseline rates as well as elements of the tiered framework.
Right now, you're not in a position to say whether you match those rates or that you're greater or less than.
Well, I'll say for multifamily, as an example, the average parking demand for a multifamily development in an urban suburban area, which is the base, which matches up with the baseline rates that we're proposing. The Parking Generation parking demand rate is 1.31, and our proposed rate is 1.3. So yes, we did use that information as part of our analysis to make these determinations on our proposal.
Any possibility you can maybe not publish number, but give some kind of summary as to that process and that it was looked at?
Yes, we can do that. That was actually discussed in a previous meeting. So we'll be updating our website with some additional information associated with that, so be on the lookout for that. We hope to post that within the next few weeks.
And currently on our currently on our webpage, we have under, I believe it's under the documents tab, we have a study that was done on peer and national peer jurisdictions and local jurisdictions to compare and contrast parking rates with jurisdictions that we found to be similar, as well as national jurisdictions that had recently changed different parking requirements to determine, what was the baseline, how do we work off of these and determine what other types of jurisdictions are doing when it comes to parking. So,
and it's on the website?
Yes, it is. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then the other thing I'm concerned about, the 60% reduction that can be provided by the director. That sounds like an awful lot without any public input or any public notification. And I'm really concerned. I mean, we are constantly being told that compliance, we have to be part of that because we're the ones that see what's going on and all of that good stuff. But here is a whole process that we have been cut off. And I think you need to take another look at that. I don't mind if the director has some authority to make some changes, but 60% is an awful lot without any public input, in my opinion.
We are continuing to look at that and in advance of further discussions with the board on February 14th. So, but thank you for your perspective on that.
And also, at what point can you stop doing reductions? Because the director can reduce it, the board of supervisors can reduce it. Can you get down to a number where it's you're providing one parking space? I mean, it doesn't sound like there's any control over this.
Well, anything
So-
that would be above the percentage that could be approved by the director would then be subject to a public hearing or subject to approval by a the board of supervisors. That generally is a administrative process. Mike can speak a little bit more to that because
But not a public hearing.
it currently is not a public hearing. It would be a public hearing, however, though, and I do caveat it with, it's currently not a public hearing. It's approved as an administrative item by the Board of Supervisors. However, parking reductions that are associated with a proffer
rezoning.
entitlement would still go and do still go to the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission as related to the entitlement or the rezoning or proffer condition amendment or whatever type of an entitlement it is.
Okay, well, thank you. I think we need to be part of the process.
Thank you for your comments. Sally, you're up next.
Thank you. I just have one question. You referred before to the fact that when the administrator makes decisions on requests for parking reductions, he is informed by county staff analysis. Could you go through what are the categories of things that are part of that analysis? And one particular question is part of that analysis currently, or will it be in the future, the impact on surrounding communities?
Well, the analysis, it depends on the type of reduction that is being proposed. So if it's a shared parking reduction, there is a technical approach to looking at shared parking. There's actual publication called Shared Parking that is utilized to evaluate those types of requests to see if it's a reasonable circumstance of being able to share the parking. For a transit-related reduction, there are criteria in the current ordinance, and there'll be criteria in the proposed ordinance that talks about meeting certain thresholds with regard to availability of transit in order to be able to qualify for such a reduction. And our other reductions that are in the ordinance or proposed for the ordinance have similar qualities to be able to say, okay, well, if you can demonstrate that you meet these circumstances, then you can be considered for a reduction.
Could you provide more detail, because those words were very general? The only thing I took away from what you just told me with regard to, for example, transit station areas or such areas is proximity to transit. What are the other factors? What are the other details that are taken into account? Because I think you have heard from all of us that there is concern about the proposed 60% authority, reduction authority. So if you could please give us, and if you can't tonight, could you please post it online?
Well, it is posted. It actually is posted online. It's in the section 6100.6 of the draft ordinance. That information outlines exactly what would need to be provided in order to be considered for a reduction based on the various categories that we have in the ordinance. So that would be a good place to start to see what those requirements would be in association with those particular elements. And just to add on to what is in that area, the submission itself requires an engineer to provide that submittal. So you have to have an engineering license, which essentially means that you are validating the information that you're submitting. Because it's, you have to uphold your professional standards in order to continue to be an engineer. And secondarily, the other element to that with regard to evaluating adverse impact is that the engineer is required to state that no adverse impact will be found with this. And staff is also charged with making sure that the evaluation is not going to create an adverse impact to the community. And I think part of that too is the procedural circumstance that we have where we notify the supervisor for every reduction that we receive, and we get their feedback on the proposal and whether or not the supervisor, would have any issues with that based on their knowledge of their supervisory district. So from that, there are other elements to a submittal that evaluate the impact and make those types of determinations.
So let me just be sure I understand. You're sharing with us that there is an assessment of the potential for adverse impact, not only on the specific development, but adjacent communities, correct?
Correct.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
All right, thank you for your comments, Sally. Lynn, you're next. Lynn, you are on mute.
Thank you. I am on mute because I think you muted me. Thank you. First, I want to thank you all for rescheduling the meeting for tonight. As president of Reston Citizens Association, we had several residents that were not able to attend the last meeting, and I hope that they're able to attend tonight. I want to address a couple of items regarding the Parking Reimagined proposal. First of which is the county has got to provide added parking enforcement to ensure that the accessible parking spaces for people with disabilities are not being impacted. As part of Reston Citizens Association, we do have a committee that is called Reston Accessibility Committee, and we have to assume that the current number of accessible and van accessible parking spaces is needed by current residents and customers with disabilities. So if the overall size of a parking lot is shrunk per state regulations, the number of spaces available for people with disabilities can be shrunk also. And current users are going to be out of luck. So that is intolerable. For developers on the horizon, the greatly reduced number of accessible and van accessible parking spaces would put people with disabilities at an even larger disadvantage, to put it mildly. Approximately 19% of Virginians are people with disabilities of all types. The difference between an accessible parking space and a van accessible parking space is that the former requires a 5-foot wide access aisle and the latter requires an 8-foot wide access aisle. Access aisles are the hash striped areas within, just for folks on the call that don't know this, those are the hash striped aisles that allow ingress and egress to and from a vehicle by a person with a disability that's using a mobility device. So I just think that this is something that gives me and the Reston Accessibility Committee, that is a committee of Reston Citizens Association, great concern. If parking is reduced in other areas within a parking lot, the fear is that people are just going to start parking in the accessible parking spaces for people with disabilities. The other, I have 5 other areas that I just want to bring up. The county must identify the specific, and I brought this up before, that we have got to look at areas on a micro level. The one size fits all does not apply. to Parking Reimagined. So the county has to identify the specific challenges of each area before changing any of those parking requirements. There are some areas that have citizens that are have an average age that is older than those who are, able to walk or bike to work. Also, the county must assure that additional green spaces and tree canopies and affordable housing will result from any reduction in required parking spaces. Now, just a reduction in required parking and an increase in density doesn't mean that you're going to have more people using pedestrian, bicycle, or transit-oriented means. So this is something that is of great concern. The other thing is that any reduction in the requirements have to be implemented in a way that doesn't shift the parking costs from developers to the residents, and especially in areas where we have affordable housing. That is, it's unfair to the residents that are already facing economic hardship. The county, so the stipulation allowing administrative approval of reductions in parking minimums has got to be stricken completely from this. This is something that from a Reston citizen perspective, this is something that this needs to go to public hearing. And then finally, the county has to have a viable plan in case our original assumptions that we're looking at today don't come to fruition, and that they are not the truth. So thank you so much. Those are the comments that I have, and I hope that the county and staff will consider this.
Thank you,
Thank
Lynn.
you.
Thank you, Lynn. I did
Thank
want to respond to one comment before we move to the next speaker. With regard to the accessible spaces, I did want to note that this was a concern that was raised very early in our discussions with the community and with other organizations. And the parking requirements for any lesser requirement, either in the tiered framework or associated with parking adjustment, the property owner still needs to meet the requirement as if there were no reduction whatsoever. So the ordinance specifically indicates that the number of accessible spaces is based on the actual parking requirement and the without any reductions applied. So I just wanted to make that clear to those in the audience that that is that we were very cognizant of that, and we wanted to make sure that we preserve that number of accessible spaces even with changes for lower parking requirements.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. But I do have to say that what this is going to do is going to put greater pressure on those accessible parking spaces where people are going to start parking in those parking spaces, making it impossible for people with disabilities to utilize. So it's the pressure is going to increase on those enforcement agencies.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Appreciate your perspective.
Next will be Susan.
Thank you. I have two somewhat unrelated questions, I guess. One is a clarification, and I'm specifically thinking of Annandale, but it might apply to other particular communities. And that is, there are a lot of small property owners, so small little plots, and they are adjacent to each other. And currently the parking lots connect. But if I understand it correctly, what you would do is any existing owner of a building could take that 20% footprint that now becomes available and build on it. And that would in turn put pressure on surrounding businesses because they would be getting the overflow traffic. And this is particularly true because right now adequate parking is not afforded to people in almost all settings in Annandale. Overflow parking is a problem that's been identified to you. And the small lots and the issues with respect to Annandale being somewhat different than maybe the assumptions you're making about other communities caused me to wonder how, if I am correct about this, you deal with the fact that parking right now is at the point where you got people circling around looking for spaces.
When it comes to development of a site and redevelopment of a site, so in your example of a property owner who gets a 20% reduction of the current parking area they have and they go to redevelop a site, nothing in this ordinance relieves them of meeting zoning ordinance provisions as they apply to density, setbacks, building height, anything of those matters. This would specifically deal with the parking area. And yes, if they are not capped out on density, they're not, they still would need to meet setbacks, and they'd have to go through site plan approval. If they're approved at site plan and approved through zoning review, they could build other buildings on site as they would have an area which would be then buildable technically.
The other element of that is if you have a situation where a property is redeveloping and you're in the rezoning process, staff typically will evaluate access between properties and make recommendations associated with that. So conceivably, in Annandale, with that example, the comprehensive plan for Annandale wants to create more connectivity with a local street network as properties redevelop. And so those are designed to serve those properties as well as provide on-street parking as those areas redevelop. So the county's transportation department in particular is usually very cognizant of ensuring that these interparcel accesses continue to be available either on the frontage of the site, within the site, or behind the site to be able to continue with those opportunities.
But I guess the answer to this is that assuming you can meet setback, et cetera, that you are going to permit someone to build on, and I take it maybe the redevelopment could be just an addition of space into the parking lot, and that you conceive perhaps that the answer is more access to the street parking, which would exacerbate the overflow parking problem that already exists. Is that fair?
Well, I would say that each site would be looked at individually with regard to all of the factors that are typically looked at with a land development application. So I can't really predict how that process will work out.
Well, we'll move on because I think some of us can predict how it's going to turn out based on existing conditions and what's reasonably predictable. But I'm going to move on. My second question really goes to, I did look on your website. I'm still trying to go through everything. It's a very complex proposal, and there are a lot of bits and pieces floating around, but not very much that does not require significant analysis. So I did look at the benchmarking report, task 3.2, which is they look at surrounding jurisdictions and then a few outliers. And in that, it seems to me you did have some communities like Alexandria will have a transit area, which is the boundary of which is described as metro. So heavy rail type of a situation to define those. But otherwise, I don't see that these other jurisdictions have adopted anything like the 20% across the board, plus a whole lot more potential reduction in so-called revitalization areas. So that seems to me to be a rather unique property of your recommendations to the Fairfax Board of Supervisors, and it does not seem to be supported by what surrounding jurisdictions do. So I was wondering, maybe there's a lack of detail in that benchmarking report, or is that take on the benchmarking report accurate?
The 20% reduction as related to a commercial revitalization area within Fairfax County as a automatic reduction, let's say, already exists and has existed for 20 years, something along those lines, within the
Probably
Richmond
more.
Highway revitalization area. It is something that is not new to the county, but it's something that we expanded to the other revitalization areas.
Well, the other thing that I'll add to that is today, actually, I was looking at some other jurisdiction info for some activities associated with the project. And I was looking at information from Prince George's County, Maryland. And they have just updated their ordinance within the last year that was adopted in April of 2022. And interestingly enough, when we talked to Prince George's County, they didn't really give us a lot of detail on where they were heading with this. But when I looked at their information today, they essentially take all the land area inside the Capitol Beltway and create a revitalization district for that and take a percentage reduction off the top for their minimum parking requirement. So that's a pretty huge area within the county that is subject to a blanket reduction. And it's at least 20%. So what we're doing in this is not unprecedented. And even within the county, it's not unprecedented in the sense that the Tyson's minimum requirements, well, frankly, there is no minimum requirement for many uses in Tyson's, and that's been in place since 2011. So there's also a 20% reduction within TSAs currently for most commercial uses and also multifamily. So we're not really breaking new ground here when we're looking at these areas, these higher density development areas, and tailoring our minimum parking requirements to those types of areas.
If I may just comment, it's all premised on the idea that you have a transit hub. And, you know, that is not a description of some of the older suburban neighborhoods. Annandale, again, is what I can speak to because I know it. But it may well be the case that there are other jurisdictions where the transit hub notion is simply does not coincide with reality or anything in terms of planning for the foreseeable future. So again, the things that might be appropriate in areas that have access to metro, heavy rail, may be a very different situation than some of the older suburban, and that's exactly what we are, is suburban neighborhood, where the whole planning doctrine that the communities developed under was car-centric. The whole idea was to aid in access by automobiles. And so you've gotten development that's gone around, has basically followed what the previous planning thoughts were about how to develop communities. So again, I appreciate Richmond Highway or Prince George's County might be what you consider to be legitimate practices to follow. But I guess I and some other community people are very concerned that the analysis of whether you've got the factual context in which to apply these restrictions, that's sort of the piece that's missing here.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
And
I'll
with
defer.
that, we'll move on to the next participant, Kim.
Kim, go ahead.
Unmute. Hi, again, thank you guys for redoing the meeting. I'm kind of new to all this and kind of listening to everything. You mentioned that a lot of the reductions have been in place, you know, for years and years, and that's fine, but there are more vehicles now, there are more neighborhoods now, there's more development coming in. So it's worse now than it was. And when it comes to a lot of the parking areas, she mentioned Annandale. I've lived in Annandale. I lived over by George Mason. Now I'm out here in Centerville, and I've seen a lot of those places where they're just inundated. And Fairfax County, I don't know the exact numbers or anything, but Fairfax County doesn't have a good transportation percentage where there's a walking percentage, the transportation, there's not a lot of, the metro, those kind of things. A lot of places you have to get in your car and drive. And when developers, you're coming in and you're saying, they want to give access to more roads or what have you, who's actually looking out? I guess who's looking out, what department, or who's looking out for that particular community at that particular time and making those decisions? That's really my biggest concern, because it appears that some person can just go willy-nilly and just start striking stuff down in the community. We don't have any input. That's the biggest concern, is that there's who's got oversight of the development. Let me stop that. Who ensures that a developer is doing what they're supposed to do? Let me just ask that flat out question.
Yeah, sure. So great question. So we have a couple different groups. We, first off, if the development, let's say a new shopping center comes in, and that shopping center was required to go through a rezoning process or any sort of zoning entitlement process that requires board approval, board of zoning appeals approval of some sort, that is a public hearing process, which would then be approved by the board. If it is something that doesn't, and even if it does, for a by right development, there is still reviews that go through our site development group, land development group, et cetera, as well as our zoning permits branch with regards to new development that is not subject to public hearing per se. So generally it's our land development services as well as our zoning permits review branch who look at different types of by right development and entitlement based development to determine if they are meeting the zoning ordinance requirements as well as building code requirements. Further, there are reviews that take place by the Department of Transportation to determine if and how they are meeting their requirements. So I don't know if Mike wanted to add more to that, as he has worked in a couple different agencies within the county.
Yeah, and I mean, just kind of to give you sort of the big picture overview of land development, Austin covered good elements of it, but if it's a rezoning case, it's the Department of Planning and Development and their zoning evaluation division who administers that element of the process. And so there is a rigorous amount of requirements that go into submitting a proposal that follow the process through to public hearings. The applicant has a number of responsibilities to work with the community and engage the community and get their feedback. And then staff has all sorts of criteria based on the comprehensive plan and standards and ordinances that factor into those reviews. So it's a very comprehensive process for entitlement. And then for the site development side, if it's a by right, as Austin alluded to, there are engineering standards that an applicant must meet. They must ensure that stormwater is managed properly, as an example. They have to meet all sorts of design criteria associated with the submission of a site plan. And they have to, if it was a rezoning case, they have to ensure that the proffers, the commitments they made with the zoning to address the issues associated with the case, as well as frequently community issues, are enforced. So, and then there are other agencies within the county that enforce various elements of that. So it's land development within Fairfax County is a huge undertaking, and there are many points of contact with the community, with staff, and with the developer to ensure that they are meeting their requirements.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Next up is Mark.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
For clarification on parking in townhouses, the standard is not changed. Ultimately, it's 2.7 spaces per townhouse, but only 2 of those can only be claimed by the townhouse owner. and the other 0.7 is available for guests?
So it's currently as proposed, it would be that it's 2.7 is the overall rate, but of that 0.2 is proposed to be for visitor shared parking. This was in response to concerns from community about overflow parking, not enough parking in townhouse communities, especially we see them in older townhouse communities, especially that were developed under a previous zoning ordinance requirement. So while the number itself of 2.7 is the same, currently, you could have your whole 2.7 within your driveway and your garage. What we're requiring now says that 0.2 spaces per unit must be provided for visitor or shared parking. So it's out in a parking lot. It's somewhere that's accessible to visitors or shared parking uses for people that live in the development.
And I'll add, one thing I'll add to that is, we're, as part of this process, we were trying to balance open space and other requirements associated with development and parking. So in that regard, we originally started thinking of terms of providing 2 dedicated spaces for a townhouse unit and 0.7 for visitor parking, which could take up a lot of space within a particular community, space that could be otherwise used for preservation of open space or other community amenities. So that was one of the reasons why we pulled back on that a little bit, but still, we are asking for dedicated visitor space as part of this proposal.
So for existing townhouse communities that don't have garages and driveways, the standard remains unchanged?
They would be considered, well, yeah, I mean, we're not making anyone change anything that's already there. However, we are looking at a process to make it easier for existing townhouse communities to increase their parking requirement through a minor variation process, which is a much cheaper process than is current and quicker process, which so currently, if I was in a townhouse community that wanted to increase their parking on site, I would have to go through a process called most likely a proffer condition amendment, which is a board hearing. It's thousands of dollars for the application fee alone. What we're looking at is simplifying that process and making it more easy for easier in a sense for townhouse communities to come in and add parking while still needing to meet open space requirements, certain things like that. But it just opens the door for some of these developments to be able to take a step towards increasing their parking if they think they need to, because their current parking is so constrained.
So for those townhouse communities that were designed with actual open space, that is green space for people to play on, kids to play and whatnot, you would make that available for additional parking?
Not always, no. I'll let Bill Malin, who just came off mute, kind of better explain that process.
That would be a decision of the townhome community if they wanted to add parking, and where they would add parking would likely be from open space, but that would be a decision for that townhome community to decide if they wanted to go to that or not. The county's not mandating them to do that. It's a process that that townhome community can choose to do or not.
So if this involves the elimination of trees and whatnot, it's okay with the county?
It would be a question for the townhome community to decide if they prefer more parking or if they prefer to leave the open space as is. The townhome community will make that decision, not the county.
I'm talking about deforestation in the
Okay, well then, if your townhome community prefers the open space and the landscaping, then they should continue with that and not ask for more parking.
Okay.
It's a process they can ask for more parking. It's a process that's there today, as Austin was saying, but requires a public hearing, requires, I think it's a $16,000 application fee and about 6 months review. This will make a process that'll be quicker and cheaper. It still has to make a decision, and it's still an application from that townhome community to ask to go through this process. It's a decision that the individual HOA will make to even pursue it or not.
Thank you for that. One other question. With respect to the overall plan that you've outlined, and I appreciate your time here, have you all gone to actual sites in the county, let's say in Franconia, Springfield, Annandale, Falls Church, etc., and looked at neighborhoods or commercial areas where this might be implemented and try and understand what the impacts would be? I get the sense a lot of this is an academic exercise you're using data from various sources, and it seems devoid of reality in some context.
Well, just to add to the conversation that occurred earlier with regard to the specific question about did we use parking generation as a source of information, I will note also that we did do site visits and site evaluations throughout this project, but particularly before the pandemic, because we wanted to make sure, we didn't really do a lot of counting during the pandemic, particularly 2020, 2021, because so much had changed with regard to how people were shopping, going to the office, et cetera. But we did have the opportunity to do survey work in the county before the pandemic, particularly for retail uses as multifamily and some office development. We also have data that is submitted in association with parking requests that include survey data, parking survey data, that we could also utilize as part of the information that we have. There have been some studies associated with particular types of development, as I mentioned, multifamily development being an example, that were done within the county that also provided a source of information for us relative to the recommendations that we were making.
And I'll also say that during this process, we met with community groups throughout the county that were specific to different areas of the county. And any community group that asked us to meet with them, we did. We've met with all different board offices to go over their concerns regarding their specific areas. And further, the three of us, as well as other people in this project, have worked in the county for a long period of time to have gone through plenty of areas in the county. And yes, we did specific specific site visits and et cetera. But again, this is not just myself, Mike, and Bill. This is a larger group that works on a project work group from representatives from many agencies of the county to opine on what we're doing.
So with respect to your research on site visits, can you provide us with provide me with a list of the actual sites you visited, the dates, and the time of day that you made these visits?
I cannot provide that to you at the current time. We do have things on our webpage with regards to different surveys we did, but I would like to move on to the next person who has a question, which is Sean.
So who would have that data?
The data is with the project team, and like as we said, this was a larger effort. This is something that we worked with a larger group to work on this. Mike, do you want to opine on this?
We are continuing to update our website with information associated with the background on how we made our determinations for parking within the county. So that information in a more general sense will be added to the website as we move along with the project, hopefully within the next couple of weeks, as we indicated earlier.
So Michael, I should direct the request to your office.
Nothing precludes you to. Yes.
I
Okay,
think
thank
Reston
you.
Citizens Association would like to have that information as well. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
As will the
think those of us
Hunterwood
in
City
Hold on.
Association.
Hold on. One person at a time. As I mentioned, we're going to go through the line and give everyone the ability to speak before we come back and turn around and go back to the group as a whole. So the next person that has their hand up has been waiting is Mark.
No, Sean.
Oh,
Mark
sorry,
just spoke.
Sean.
Hey, good evening, guys. First of all, my name is Sean Newman. I am a board member with Fairfax Alliance for Better Bicycling. And I just wanted to say thank you for working to reduce the parking regulations here in the county and the requirement for parking. Driving that downward is a positive move within the county and for the future of the county, and is in keeping with the strategic plan that was recently approved by the Board of Supervisors as well. So I first wanted to applaud you for that. I think that it's great that we are working to drop that number down, especially in the areas that are being well served by transit and in those revitalization zones. Also, thank you for making it easier to administratively drop those further if the area supports a lower parking number. I think that's all good flexibility for the county to have that allows us to be much smarter about the way that we require parking moving into the future. So thank you, especially as we are trying to push away from vehicle use more so. As far as the bicycle parking, which is a new thing for this in the Parking Reimagined, I wanted to say thank you for including that. However, I did want to mention that I think that it should absolutely be increased, especially in some of those areas, the revitalization zones, the other areas such as that. I did have a question, which is, why is schools not called out separately?
With regards to bicycle parking,
I didn't see either bicycle or regular parking.
Mike?
Schools, the schools fall under the bicycle parking scheme. They are part of that. They're not excluded from meeting a minimum requirement. And then with regard to parking, when you look at schools for auto parking, when you look at schools, and maybe it's under bikes as well, the way it's structured in the ordinance, it's when you look under public uses, under those categories, it says for schools, see schools, comma, private. And so the parking requirements for schools, for public schools, is actually under the private schools category in the ordinance. So maybe that's where you that was missed. But I am certain that there are requirements for bicycle parking as well as automobile parking for schools.
Okay, so given that that is the case, I think it would be very helpful to clarify that the school's private is private and public. I'm not certain why that's kind of separated out in that way, and it's a little bit hard to read.
We were bound by the ordinance classifications and definitions. We were not, as part of this project, we were not changing any ordinance definitions. So we had to maintain what's in the ordinance today. And I realize it's a bit confusing. I find it confusing myself, but nevertheless, that is what we are bound to. So those classifications did not change in any way as part of this project.
Okay, and then one other comment relating to specifically to schools, if that is the case. I think that number should be significantly higher especially for bike parking. There is no reason in many places around the county why there is as little bike parking on school property as there currently is, especially good bike parking. I know many of the schools nearby me, the bike parking is completely full, and then kids are having to tie their bikes up to trees or to signposts, etc. So I would highly recommend that uses such as schools be increased for bicycle parking.
Thank you for your comments, Sean. Next up is Larry. Larry, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you so much for holding this meeting. I just have a couple observations for you. One is, it seems to me that I'm hearing a lot that there's concern for the impacts of this proposal for Parking Reimagined. And I know that I've lived in a condominium where parking was limited and parking was a major issue. And I can't find it right now, but I think that it even had more parking than what would be proposed here. And my concern is to, as you go through this process, to really think about, in particular, lower income parties. Those parties may not have the resources to be able to find parking elsewhere, or they may have 2 or even 3 cars, and that makes it very difficult. And if public transportation is not convenient for them, if it doesn't provide them the access they need at the hours they need, then it could really put them into a bind. If you could do more to flesh out those kinds of issues, I think it would be very helpful. I also want to observe that one of the great things about this is I think that looking at parking is a good thing. I think trying to right-size parking so that the parking is appropriate to the building and considers things like public transit makes all the sense in the world. I just don't want people to be in a situation where they don't have the ability to have and use a car when they really need one. I know that in most cases, I had my car parked. I used public transportation. I rode my bicycle, and it was not the norm to use my car. So I thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate your taking the time to listen to all of this.
Thank you for your comments, Larry. Next up will be Betty, and after Betty will be C. Campbell.
Hi, I have two questions. One, if a developer gets his rezoning application approved and then comes in later for a reduction from the parking provided in the zoning application, they would no longer need to go through the public hearing process. Isn't that correct?
I think the answer is it depends. Mike, can you opine on that?
It would, in general, that answer would be no. They would not have to go through the public hearing process. The only caveat to that would be if they were required to build a certain number of parking spaces in conjunction with the rezoning, and they didn't proffer to allow a reduction to be considered in the future, then they would have to amend their zoning case, which would then require a public hearing. But otherwise, if a
That's the answer for
developer,
today's standards too. It doesn't change with Park and Reimagine.
Correct.
That's how we enforce it today, and it would not change as proposed.
Okay, but the way it goes is there may never be a public hearing with regard to the reduction in parking because if they include in their proffers that they can later come in for a parking reduction, then they can do so and avoid having a public hearing with input from adjacent neighborhoods on the requested parking reduction, as I understand it. Is that correct?
yeah, I want to be clear that there is no public hearing required today for any parking reduction. There are parking reductions that are considered with rezoning cases that go through, the rezoning case itself goes through a public hearing process. And so the parking reduction flows with that process.
Okay,
But if you
when
submit,
you say that it can be dealt
please
with.
let me
zoning
finish. Please let me finish. For any other parking reduction, there is no public hearing required. Some of them, or most of them currently, have to be approved by the board in an administrative action. It is not a public hearing. So there is no public hearing component to that process.
Right, but when you say that this will be resolved if there needs to be a rezoning application and there is a public hearing with regard to the rezoning application. In fact, if this parking issue is deferred to after the approval of the rezoning application, then the developer could just come in with no public input to request and obtain a parking.
Well, even with that, we had a situation with an application in the county. It was a rezoning application that went through a review and approval process with the board. They did not say anything at all about wanting to do a parking reduction during that process. When they came in after the fact to seek a parking reduction, it was not brought forward to the board because the board member in particular, because we advise the board member and bring them into the process, the board member was concerned that the community was not involved in the conversations about a potential parking reduction, and thus he would not support the reduction. So that basically ended the conversation about having a reduction for that particular site. So there are other procedures, policies in place that can address those types of situations if it's a proposal that occurs after the rezoning is approved.
Yes, but if the rezoning application says that they may be coming in for a request later, and then the rezoning application is approved, that situation would not arise because it has already been foreshadowed, and then the rezoning application has been approved, and it's maybe not able to have a public process at the later stage. That was one question. The second question is in regard to the studies. I think Austin said that there was a study that was posted on the website that had like ITE parking rates for suburban areas near transit. Is that correct? And what's the name of the study and where on the website can one find that?
At the present time, there are two pieces of analysis from our consultant that are municipality comparatives of parking requirements and parking proposals for the county to evaluate. At this time, there is no specific information on the website about ITE parking generation information.
We are updating and are always updating our webpage. So I would suggest in the near future, taking a look, we're going to be adding more resources to our webpage with regards to the project as a whole.
Could you notify like all the people who are participating in this meeting when things are added to the webpage, for instance?
If you join the listserv, I believe it actually lets you know.
And also those two pieces of analysis that you mentioned, are they already on the website?
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
Okay, and what are their titles, and are they listed in documents on the website, or how does
They
one
are.
find
Tell you
They
exactly
are
where they
listed in
are.
documents.
They're under documents and they are under other, where we have 5 different things in there. And we've got national peer review, task 3.2, and a regional peer review. Those were the peer reviews that were done by Nelson Nygaard, who was a consultant on this project.
Drop the link to both of them in the chat just now.
All right. Next, we've got
Wait, I had one more question about the studies. I think someone mentioned that there were studies or surveys with regard to multifamily buildings, and that the county staff did, or its consultants. And I think it was mentioned that this was for locations in Fairfax County. Are those studies or surveys on the website?
those studies.
Not at present. We are, as we said earlier, we are continuing to update the website. We had had some discussions previously about putting some additional information about how we gathered our information and how information sources that we used. And so we are hopefully going to have that information up within the next couple of weeks.
All right.
And how does one, sorry, this is a dumb question, but how does one put oneself on the listserv?
It's on the webpage on the bottom, or within the main body. There is a portion on here. Let me find it with regards to the listserv, and I can drop that in the chat as well, so that we can move on to our next question regarding getting on the listserv. And if you Google Fairfax County listservs, we do have a web page that has different listservs available, and you can sign up for any notifications related to this project as a whole. But there is a link directly to it on the web page as well. Next is C. Campbell.
Hi, I'm Kerry Campbell, North Springfield resident since 1988. I chair the North Springfield Civic Association Planning and Zoning Committee, but I'm only speaking for myself and not the Civic Association tonight. During my 35 years in Fairfax County, I've never owned an automobile, so I applaud and encourage your efforts to reduce minimum parking requirements. We need a walkable, bikeable, pedestrian, rail-friendly communities. Professor Don Soup writes in his book, The High Cost, there it is right there, the high cost of free parking. We need to remove minimum parking requirements, set the right price for curb parking, return parking revenue to pay public services. Pasadena, California, home of the Rose Bowl, is a success story. It returns $1 million a year in parking meter revenue to public services. So my question, I've got two quick ones. What portion or percentage of parking in Fairfax County can the county actually charge for?
The county has authority to charge for parking. Our county Department of Transportation is actively working on a project to begin to implement metered parking. And currently they are looking at Tyson's and Reston as pilot projects for that effort. And I don't know, I haven't been updated on that for probably 9 months, we'll say. So I'm not sure what their status is with regard to implementing that, but the FCDOT is the lead agency on that.
So it sounds like what you're saying is we're on the right track. I also wanted to second the comments that Sean Newman made earlier about applauding your efforts, especially in those areas accessible to transit and, of course, bike. And then my last question, Arlington County, on this subject of raising revenue through the meters, Arlington County seems to be doing an effective job there. Have you benchmarked with Arlington County and what they're doing? You alluded to Prince George's County earlier.
Well, Arlington was one of the jurisdictions that were part of the municipality surveys that we had done for the project. And with regard to metered parking, that again would be Fairfax DOT to have those conversations with Arlington. I'm sure they have. They also had a consultant for their part of the project, for their on-street meter project. And I'm sure they got other jurisdictional information in association with that. So, but we are familiar with what Arlington is doing for off-street parking and regulations, and particularly tailoring their parking regulations to higher development areas, similar to what we're looking at in Fairfax County.
Very good. Well, thank you for this meeting. Thank you for this opportunity. Is there, I know the timeline that you showed, we're moving on. Is there any time left to come and talk to, for example, the North Springfield Civic Association?
You can send us a request and we'll determine if we do. We're going to the Board of Supervisors Land Use Policy Committee on February 14th. And we're looking at looking at early spring for authorization and public hearings to follow in March and April and June, I believe, of next year is when public hearings could be scheduled for.
Thank you again for doing a thankless job and very important work for the health of our environment and our community. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Next up is Stephen.
Good evening. I wanted to echo Mr. Zaragoza's comment. Basically, I believe that access to transportation and utilization of that transportation should strongly influence the parking requirements. And I'd also like to mention that I haven't checked out here recently out here in Centerville, but last time I checked, there was we had bus service east towards Vienna, but we didn't have any reasonable bus service north south at all. So again, there is out here in Centerville, there seems to be a strong need for auto transportation.
Well, and at the tiered framework that we have, we're not making any changes to the minimum requirements other than right sizing particular rates and that sort of thing. So from the standpoint of that area of the county, there's really no change proposed in association with our project.
Well, and I only mentioned that because of my familiarity out here. But I just wanted to emphasize that the need that the access and utilization of transportation should influence the minimum requirements for parking.
Right, and that's the basis for our tiered framework, in the sense that we looked at areas of the county that have higher intensity and density of development, but also looked at how those areas were served by transit as part of our analysis and recommendations. So it really is a key factor in association with how we are making our proposals.
Okay, I just wanted to, I guess I just wanted to hear that again. It is a very, very important condition, and I just wanted to hear that it was that need was recognized.
Yes, it was.
All right, thank you.
All right, next up is Jeff.
This is Jeff Barnes, and thank you. When you say access to transit, I want to make certain that you're talking about fixed guideway transit and not bus service. I say that because bus service can change. In the recent realignment of the Silver Line bus service in Herndon-Reston area, our community has lost access. At least in half the community is now closer to 3/4 of a mile when it was a 1/4 of a mile away from bus service. And so having a bus service for the basis of decreasing parking is transient. We're talking about transit, and now it's transient. 6 months from now or a year from now, the bus service can change, and what might have been serviced by a bus might not be, or it might now be such a walk that it's impractical to the people who normally depended on it. And just like I wouldn't want a high density development to be developed based on bus service that might not be there in the future, I wouldn't want to see parking restrictions lowered based on, well, there's bus service. That bus service might not be there when people move in and after they got used to it. So I think fixed guideways, bus rapid transit, trams, trolleys, light rail, metro, VRE, any of those usually are there. But we know that trams and trolleys have disappeared over the decades. So that's not even sufficient on its own. But I give that a better chance of being there in the near future than the bus service that can change every 3 years when the county realigns its service. I wanted to make that so that you're aware of it, that we do not lower parking restrictions based on a transient transit. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments there, Jeff. So I will say that we're at our meeting time now, but we're going to give it 10 more minutes to go to 8:40. And any comments that we don't get to, I'm going to drop in the chat the email this is just our shared group email for our our amendment. And anyone who does not get to have their comments heard tonight can always either send us an email through that email or go through the public input forum, or send again the email that I'm going to put in the chat. So next up, I believe, is Jim has their hand up and they have not been heard from tonight. Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you. I hadn't planned on raising a hand, but I had been typing away since minute one with questions, your invitation, and I guess we're never going to get to those. I think I mentioned last time also, the format of these meetings, I think may be too short, given the number of questions, concerns folks have raised. I wanted to ask first whether anything substantive had changed in the proposal from between last time and tonight relative to the proposed reductions of loading spaces, either with the formulas or with administrative reductions. And in particular, I have a concern that at least what was proposed in the white paper prioritized developer cash and developer profit ahead of citizens' ability to access the disabled spaces. There are severe conflicts already between delivery vehicles and the ability to get in and out of disabled spaces. Did anything change? And I've heard that perhaps it may have. Did anything change between last time and tonight on that?
Bill?
We are in the process of making some updates that we will be providing to the board as part of the February 14th meeting. We have not published or revised, made any of those available yet because we wanted to continue with today's meeting. We are looking at loading as well as some other aspects. So it'll be about a week when we provide that information to the board for the Land Use Policy Committee. So we're looking at some updates to the loading areas currently, and then we're still having those discussions because, again, we have not completed this portion of the outreach before we finalize the next version of that document.
So that's a maybe?
We have some draft language today, Jim, but again, we wanted to finish this before we finalize any language.
Okay. Secondly, with respect to the topic of administrative reductions in general, it seems to me it continues the same sad pattern from the Gartner report about streamlining and speeding up approvals and cutting citizens out. And the reductions to an additional 60% sound like they happen without notice to neighbors. And I wondered, do those apply, can those apply to by right uses and uses where a number of parking spaces weren't offered or put in a development condition? It sounded like from one of the answers that it could. What I wonder though is if somehow the neighbors get wind of this and they object in some way, can they appeal the determination that the parking or the loading spaces were unnecessary? Can they appeal that to the BZA as a zoning ordinance determination if they disagree with it? I don't know what the criteria would be for determining something was or wasn't unnecessary, at least the way it's worded now. But procedurally, if the neighbors, they don't get a public hearing, they don't like it, they're unhappy, can they appeal the director's determination that the parking was unnecessary?
Mike, do you have
Honestly, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think we should
The
speculate.
director, the decision by the director is appealable to the BZA, just like the Board of Zoning Appeal, director, zoning administration can be appealed to the BZA. It doesn't change.
How would the neighbors know that the parking had been reduced?
There's no public notification requirement. And so
Right, well, I'm asking, how would they know?
let it be. Mike, you deal with parking reductions on a daily basis.
Our current procedures do not require public notification.
Yes,
It
I
is
understand
part
that.
of a
I'm trying
board.
to offer constructive suggestions, and I think the community would appreciate knowing and that it be done transparently and openly, and that they know what's going on so that they have a chance to open their big mouth if they want to. Couldn't that be baked into this, some perfunctory notice to somebody?
The notice is still going to be going to the Board of Supervisors, the board member of that community, regardless if there is a board action item or not. So that is not proposed to go away, that we will be notifying the board member.
I think you're vetoing that.
We're taking all comments. I'm not vetoing anything. I'm just saying that I just want to make it clear that we are still, if this were to be approved, the procedure would still be in place, that even though it would not be approved a administrative item by the board, it's something that the board member would still be made aware of the reduction as is done today.
And I think that conversation also is a board level conversation with regard to how they want staff to handle these requests going forward.
Quickly and quietly.
Well, that the board is the public body that makes that determination with regard to having staff change a procedure to require a public hearing.
This seems to accommodate the developers and shut the citizens out. I think it could be improved. I have one other question, if there's a moment for that. I don't know how many other folks are waiting. One of the terms used in the draft for the administrative reductions was that the developer can impose, I think it's appropriate conditions, that it's in at least two places. What I wondered is, does the director have statutory authority to impose conditions? I guess they're like development conditions, but does the director have statutory authority to do that in the absence of a public hearing? Is there something in the code that empowers the director to put conditions on an applicant? If there isn't, is there some pending request or enabling legislation, or and maybe that's a question for the county attorney. I don't mean to put you all on the spot, but
That is not a question that I can answer. That is a county attorney question.
Yeah, can the director impose conditions, or do you need enabling legislation to create that procedure?
We would have to ask the county attorney and have them opine.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm asking. Thank you. And if for whatever reason there's another bite at the apple, I expect there are more people who might have more questions or comments if there's an opportunity for that. Whether it's an hour and a half or whatever, it's so abbreviated.
Yeah, there's as we said before, this will, as all amendments, will go to a public hearing, and like we've said, we're still taking comments throughout. Let it not maybe in a meeting per se that we put on, but there still will be the public hearing to voice concerns or voice opinions. And at any time, you can email us your concerns or opinions.
Thank you.
All right, with that, I think we are at that time frame that I talked about, 8:40, it's 8:39 right now. So what I would say is that in the chat, I have dropped a few different things I put in there, and I'll put in there again a copy, our Parking Reimagined webpage. On the webpage, again, we have our comment portal, which is open till February 2nd to give us comments on our current proposal. And then further as well on there is a email address, which I will copy one more time and put in the chat. If you have any questions that were not be able to be heard tonight or opinions you'd like us to hear, please feel free to email them to us at the email address that I just put in the chat there. Lastly, as mentioned, we are going to be going back to the Board of Supervisors and the Land Use Policy Committee on February 14th. And if you're interested in this project, I highly suggest that you keep looking at our webpage. Prior to that meeting, we'll be posting an updated white paper with the updates to the ordinance, as Bill alluded to, and those should be posted here about a week before our public or the meeting with Land Use Policy Committee. But Mike, is there anything else?
So Austin, sorry, I have a question. If we have already submitted, if we have already submitted a comment, are we able to submit another one?
I believe so. Yeah. And if for some reason you can, if there's an issue with that server, please feel free to the email I just put in there, the email address, the DPD LDS parking amendment at fairfaxcounty.gov. If for some reason there's a technical issue with that, please send those to that email address. That is our.
Thank you.
Yep.
So is February 2nd, the comment needs to come in before February 2nd or anytime?
Anytime there, I believe it's the end of the day, February 2nd at midnight, that we'll be closing. And again, the email address that I just put in the comments, anytime during this process, you can email us that, and that is not capped at February 2nd. That will go until this is heard at public hearing and a decision is made by the board. So.
I'm sorry, I don't really, that's not the Fairfax County.gov/mailing list, but where is that email address? I'm scrolling.
It's in the comments. I just put it in there. It's DPD LDS parking amendment at fairfax.gov. I just put that in there. That's our shared email address for anyone who has comments that they want to add, they didn't put or can't put in the public.
And where will we be able to see the aggregate of the comments?
I think we're heading into some territory where people are asking some other questions. I think, Austin has given the information that is needed to be able to provide comments to the website. And, these things will be aggregating. So I just want to express my appreciation to everyone for participating tonight. And thank you for your input.
Yeah, like I said, thank you so much for everyone's input. Like all of our different meetings, a video of this meeting will be posted on our webpage, and that will be under the past meetings. So thank you so much. And as of that, we have met our time frame, and I look forward to future engagement regarding this project. Have a good evening.
Have a good evening.